"You're just a pretty bauble, Eugenia," Barnabas scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "A woman with no head for numbers, only society balls." He had no idea that beneath my delicate gloves I was calculating every single property deed, every investment. While he gambled away our fortune, I was quietly buying up the very ground beneath his feet. Soon his world would crumble, and he'd learn his trophy wife wasn't just a pretty face. She was the architect of his spectacular downfall. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. The sharp crack of the morning newspaper being slammed onto the mahogany table echoed through the breakfast room, jolting Eugenia from her quiet contemplation of the rose pattern on her teacup. Barnabas, her husband, usually so jovial in public, was a storm cloud brewing over his poached egg. "The audacity! Another bill, Eugenia," he grumbled, though his eyes never quite met hers. He always seemed to address the air beside her, as if she were a particularly dull wallpaper pattern. "The cost of maintaining Fanshawe Manor, I tell you, it's simply exorbitant, and your dressmaker, darling, is a veritable bandit." Eugenia's hand, resting on the cool porcelain, tightened almost imperceptibly. Her latest gown, a modest lilac silk, had been a necessary expenditure for Lady Pembroke's charity gala, an event Barnabas himself insisted they attend to maintain appearances. Appearances indeed, his mostly. Perhaps, Barnabas, if your ventures had borne the fruit you expected, these small matters wouldn't cause such distress, she offered, her voice soft, carefully measured. She knew how to speak to him. A whisper often carried more weight than a shout, especially when it held a sting he couldn't quite articulate. He merely snorted, raking a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Ventures? My dear girl, you haven't the faintest grasp of commerce. Business is a man's world, a game of strategy and bold risks, not of lace and gossip. You wouldn't understand the delicate balance, the ebb and flow. Truly, sometimes I wonder if you comprehend anything beyond which fork to use." The insult, so casually delivered, landed like a cold stone in her heart, though her expression remained as serene as a summer pond. A pretty bauble, he called her? A woman with no head for numbers. He saw only the elegant coiffure, the perfectly gloved hands, the gentle smile she wore like a shield. He didn't see the ledger books hidden beneath her sewing basket, or the quiet hours she spent poring over figures by candlelight long after he'd retired, snoring, to bed. For 7 years, his grandiose schemes had hemorrhaged their once substantial inheritance. The shipping routes that vanished, the mines that proved barren, the fantastical inventions that never quite invented anything. Each failure chipped away at their security, but more painfully at her soul. And with each setback, his condescension toward her grew, feeding his own bruised ego. "What we need, Eugenia," he declared, pushing away his half-eaten breakfast, "is a substantial investment, something truly transformative. But where is one to find such capital when one is surrounded by obligations?" His gaze flickered towards her, then away, laden with unspoken blame. She watched him rise, pacing the room like a caged lion, though it was a cage of his own making. Obligation. That was her, in his eyes. A beautiful, costly ornament, adding nothing but expense to his already precarious existence. He had no idea that the very ground he paced upon, the grand old Fanshawe Manor, was a delicate house of cards he believed was sturdy, held aloft by threads he couldn't see. Threads she had woven, one by one. She simply inclined her head, a silent acknowledgment of his pronouncement. "Indeed, Barnabas, I am certain you will find a solution, as you always do." The words were honeyed, laced with an irony that only she could taste. He would find a solution, yes, but it would not be the one he expected. Not by a long shot. He strode from the room, muttering about contacting his solicitor, leaving Eugenia alone with her quiet fury and the lingering scent of his expensive cigar smoke. She smiled then, a small, private smile that held a promise of seismic change. His pretty bauble was about to shake his world to its foundations. That evening, as Barnabas snored softly in his study, a plume of expensive cigar smoke still lingering in the air, Eugenia slipped away. She didn't go to her embroidery or a novel, but to a small, unassuming antechamber tucked away at the back of the house, rarely visited by anyone. There, beneath a loose floorboard, she kept a small, sturdy box. Inside, not jewels, but ledgers meticulously penned in her elegant hand, alongside a stack of legal documents. Her other life began when the carriage rattled through the cobbled streets, taking her not to a social call, but to a discreet office in a less fashionable part of town. The gaslight flickered softly, casting long shadows as she entered. Montgomery Ingram, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a sharp mind, rose from his desk. He was a picture of efficiency, his spectacles perched on his nose, a stack of papers always at hand. "Good evening, Mrs. Fanshawe," he greeted, a subtle warmth in his voice that acknowledged her true position, not just her social one. He knew her as Mrs. Ashworth in this world, an alias she'd carefully chosen years ago. "Montgomery," she replied, settling into the worn armchair opposite his desk. The scent of old paper and ambition filled the air. "Any news?" He pushed a thick folder across the desk. "The rents from the tenement buildings are steady as always, £950 this month precisely. The commercial storefronts too, another 750. Your municipal bond has matured beautifully, yielding an additional 300. A quiet satisfaction bloomed in Eugenia's chest. £2,000 a month, quietly, reliably flowing into her accounts. Money she had built from the small inheritance her eccentric Aunt Mildred had left her, scoffed at by Barnabas as merely pin money. He had no idea it had become the foundation of an empire. "And the land parcels?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the figures. "Any new interest in the East End?" "Indeed. Builders are looking to expand. We're holding for the right offer, just as you instructed." Montgomery's respect was palpable, a stark contrast to Barnabas's dismissive scorn. Here, her intellect was not only acknowledged, but valued. "And his accounts?" she asked, the inflection in her voice subtly shifting, a flicker of that familiar resentment. Montgomery cleared his throat. "Lord Barnabas's import-export warehouse is struggling, as anticipated. I've ensured that the mortgage payments are current, processed, through the usual shell company, of course. He still believes it's merely timely repayment from a distant investor." Eugenia gave a humorless smile, as he always does, and Fanshawe manner. Also secure, the original lender was quite eager to sell the mortgage, a hefty sum, but it ensures we have complete control. He believes he's merely renegotiated terms with a new bank. The threads, she thought, were tightening. Barnabas, so confident in his grand schemes, was entirely unaware that his very home, his failing business, even his beloved lifestyle, were all now subtly under her financial thumb. Her silent beneficence had kept his house of cards from collapsing too soon. "And the shipping venture he's so enamored with?" she pressed, remembering his bluster at breakfast. "Ah, yes. The anonymous investors pulled out their latest installment as per your instructions. He's already contacting them, quite bewildered. We've managed to route the £150,000 back through his accounts, making it appear as if his original investment has been returned, with a small penalty for early withdrawal. He's still under the impression he merely had a change of heart, not that his entire venture was propped up by unseen hands. Eugenia closed her eyes for a moment, picturing Barnabas's bewildered face. £150,000. That was the precise amount she had funneled into his most disastrous venture, making him believe he was a financial wizard, only to pull the rug out at the crucial moment. He truly believed his own brilliance was saving the day, when in fact her quiet determination was the only thing keeping him afloat. "Excellent, Montgomery. Keep everything as it is for now. The timing, as we discussed, is crucial." He nodded, a silent conspirator. "At your command, Mrs.
Ashworth." As the carriage carried her back to Fanshawe Manor, the gas lamps illuminating the dark streets, Eugenia felt a strange mixture of triumph and weariness. For 7 years she had worn two faces, the elegant, decorative wife and the shrewd, silent benefactor. Barnabas saw only the surface, never the depths, but soon, very soon, he would see everything, and it would be glorious. Barnabas called a solemn meeting in the drawing room 2 days later.
The air felt heavy, not with the usual scent of polish and potpourri, but with his self-pitying indignation. He sat opposite Eugenia, steepled fingers pressed against his lips, looking for all the world like a man burdened by the weight of empires, rather than one who had just squandered a substantial fortune on yet another foolish whim. "Eugenia, my dear," he began, his voice laced with an exaggerated solemnity, "we must have a frank discussion." He paused for dramatic effect, as if he were about to announce a national tragedy. These are trying times, truly trying. That confounded shipping venture, a promising endeavour, mind you, but these unforeseen reversals have left us in a most precarious position. Unforeseen reversals, she thought, biting back a smile. He meant her pulling the plug on her own money she'd funneled into his scheme. It was almost too delicious. "Oh, Barnabas," she said, her voice a picture of gentle concern. "I am so dreadfully sorry to hear that.
I had such high hopes for your acumen." The word acumen hung in the air, a tiny, glittering barb that he, in his self-absorption, would take as a compliment. He puffed out his chest slightly. "Indeed, my acumen is beyond question. It's merely the fickle hand of fate, and, dare I say, the ever-increasing demands of our household." His gaze drifted pointedly towards her, a clear implication that her elegance, her position, as mistress of the manor, was the real drain. "I've been consulting with my solicitors," he continued, oblivious to the controlled fire in her eyes, "and it's clear we must make adjustments. Painful ones, I'm afraid.
But necessary to safeguard our future." He cleared his throat, taking a deep breath as if preparing for a difficult surgical procedure. "Your dress allowance, for instance, it's extravagant. We must reduce it by, say, half. And the upkeep of your conservatory, my dear, while delightful, is no longer a luxury we can afford. Perhaps we could sell some of your less used trinkets? That rather flamboyant pearl necklace, perhaps." Eugenia's fingers tightened in her lap, her knuckles white beneath the lace. Her pearl necklace, a gift from her mother, chosen with such love. He spoke of it as if it were a common bauble. "And furthermore," Barnabas pressed on, emboldened by her silence, taking it for meek acceptance, "we must consider the long view. Our position in society, while still esteemed, relies on a bedrock of financial stability. It is imperative, Eugenia, that we secure our future through advantageous means. I have been thinking, perhaps it is time you devoted your considerable charms to a more substantial contribution to the household. Perhaps Lady Pembroke has a wealthy, unattached cousin she might introduce you to, someone with a deeper pocket who might be persuaded to invest in family enterprises. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her husband suggesting she, his wife, should secure their family's future by enchanting some rich suitor. It was beyond insult. It was degradation. He saw her not as a partner, not even as an intelligent individual, but as a mere commodity, a pretty face to be trotted out, a means to an end, all to patch up the holes in his sinking ship, a ship he refused to admit was sinking because he was the captain. "I understand, Barnabas," she managed, her voice impossibly calm, a thin veneer over a roaring inferno. "I shall do whatever is necessary for the family's well-being." The irony was so thick it nearly choked her. He would never know how much she had already done, how much she was still doing to keep him from utter ruin. He saw her as the problem, the expenditure, the decorative burden. He had no idea she held the keys to his entire world. He beamed, relief washing over his face. "Excellent, my dear. I knew you would understand. A true Fanshawe, always thinking of the family. Perhaps we shall salvage this yet. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must write to Lord Northcote regarding a new, most promising venture. This one, I assure you, cannot fail." Eugenia watched him stride out, whistling a jaunty tune, already dreaming of his next grand success. Her eyes, however, held a chilling gleam. He had called her a pretty bauble. He wanted her to secure their future with her charms. Very well. She would secure it. And his new venture? It wouldn't just fail, it would shatter, taking his entire world with it. He had just sealed his own fate with her blessing. The groundwork was laid, the trap was sprung. The silence after Barnabas's departure was thick, pressing in on Eugenia like a suffocating blanket. His words, delivered with such casual cruelty, echoed in the quiet drawing room. "Sell some of your less-used trinkets, that rather flamboyant pearl necklace." And the worst, the utterly unforgivable suggestion about Lady Pembroke's cousin, as if she were a prize mare to be shown off for a rich buyer. She walked to the window, watching the last sliver of twilight fade over the manicured gardens, once a source of comfort, now just another reminder of the crumbling facade. For years she had nursed a fragile hope, a whisper in the back of her mind that perhaps, underneath all his bluster and self-importance, Barnabas truly loved her. Perhaps he was merely misguided, overwhelmed, and would eventually see her, truly see her, beyond the pretty gowns and polished manners. She remembered their early days, a fleeting image of a younger Barnabas, charming and attentive, complimenting her wit as much as her beauty. Had it been real then? Or had she simply been a pleasing reflection of his own youthful ambition? She recalled the day he'd given her the pearl necklace, a string of milky white gems, saying, "Only the best for my Eugenia, my radiant star." He hadn't mentioned its monetary value then, only its beauty, its perfect complement to her complexion. Now it was just a flamboyant trinket to be sold. It wasn't just the money, not anymore. It was the complete, utter disregard for her person, her feelings, her very being. He didn't love her. He loved the comfortable life she provided, the elegant home she managed, the social standing she maintained. She was an extension of his ego, a decorative prop in the grand play of his self-importance. And now that his own foolishness had threatened that comfort, he was perfectly willing to pawn her off, metaphorically or otherwise, to maintain his illusion. A quiet tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of profound, icy clarity. The hope she had clung to, the belief that he might somehow transform, had finally, irrevocably shattered. It lay in pieces around her, sharp and glittering, reflecting the truth she could no longer ignore. He would never change. He would never see her. He would only ever see what he could take from her. And in that moment, gazing at the darkening sky, Eugenia knew. She didn't just need to secure her own independence, she needed to dismantle his entirely. Every single thread she had meticulously spun, every payment she had covertly made, every foundation she had quietly laid beneath his feet, she would now systematically withdraw them. Let him flail. Let him see what it was truly like to face ruin without her silent, unseen hand propping him up. Her heart, which had felt bruised and heavy for so long, now felt strangely light, liberated. It was not a decision born of anger, though anger simmered beneath the surface, but of absolute conviction. This was not merely revenge, it was a reclamation of herself, of her worth, of the life she deserved. She walked purposefully to her writing desk, her movements fluid and decisive. Picking up a pen, she uncapped it, the scratch of the nib on the crisp paper, a small, resolute sound in the quiet room. She would write to Montgomery Ingram first thing in the morning. The time for silent beneficence was over. The time for a public revelation, a glorious collapse, had finally arrived. Barnabas would soon learn what a woman with a head for numbers, a woman he called a mere bauble, could truly accomplish. After Barnabas left the drawing room, his words still stinging, I didn't waste a moment. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I wrote the urgent note to Montgomery Ingram. The next morning, before the city had fully stirred, my carriage took me to his office. It's time, Montgomery, I said, my voice quiet but firm as I sat across from him. The worn leather of the armchair felt familiar, a sanctuary from the gilded cage of Fanshawe Manor. Pull it all. The mortgages on the manor, the warehouse, the anonymous investments in his shipping venture. All of it. Montgomery, ever efficient, merely nodded, his pen already poised over a fresh ledger. As you wish, Mrs. Ashworth. I've already prepared the necessary paperwork. The notices will go out this afternoon. The lenders for the manor mortgage will be informed of your true identity as the holder. The shell companies funding his import-export will withdraw their support. And the £150,000 will make sure it's clear where that capital truly came from and why it's being rescinded. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a quiet storm of resolve. It wasn't an act of vengeance born of immediate rage, but the culmination of years of calculated patience. Barnabas had dismissed me, demeaned me, and now he would face the consequences of his blindness. For the next few days I watched him, a silent observer in my own home. He became increasingly agitated. The post brought him thick envelopes, not of social invitations, but official-looking documents. He would tear them open with a frustrated grunt, his face clouding over with confusion, then growing red with anger. "Confounded solicitors!" I heard him bellow from his study one afternoon, the sound echoing through the usually tranquil halls. What is this nonsense about a change in ownership of the manor's mortgage? Some obscure bank, they say, and those investors pulling out their funds at the very last moment.
It's sabotage, Eugenia, I tell you. He burst into the drawing room where I was arranging a vase of late summer roses, his face flushed. Do you hear this, my dear? These absurdities. My import-export warehouse. They're claiming someone else holds the mortgage now. A complete unknown. It's simply preposterous. I met his furious gaze with a serene smile. Oh, Barnabas, how dreadful. I am certain it will all sort itself out.
You are so clever with these things. The words tasted like ash on my tongue, but my expression remained unreadable. He looked at me, truly looked, for a split second, searching for something, perhaps a flicker of shared panic. but he found only polite sympathy and quickly dismissed me, turning back to pace the room. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. He couldn't possibly imagine that the obscure bank and the unknown investor were merely fronts for the woman he called a pretty bauble. He was so deeply entrenched in his own self-importance, so convinced of his singular financial genius, that the idea of me orchestrating his undoing was simply beyond the realm of his comprehension. The withdrawal was surgical, precise. Montgomery ensured that the public records were updated, the legal notices served, and the financial institutions made aware. The official paperwork made no mention of Mrs. Eugenia Fanshawe, of course. It was all handled through legitimate, if complex, channels, holding companies, trusts, and the carefully crafted alias of Mrs. Ashworth. I knew the impact wouldn't be immediate and catastrophic, not yet. This was the slow, inexorable tightening of the noose. He was still walking the familiar grounds of his manor, still believing it was truly his. But soon the legal notices, the phone calls from his increasingly bewildered solicitors, and the sudden drying up of all his usual credit lines would force him to confront a terrifying reality. He was alone, utterly exposed, and without a single safety net. And he had no idea that the net had been woven by my very own hands, and that I was now unraveling it, thread by agonizing thread. The air in the manor grew colder, a chill that had nothing to do with the changing season, but everything to do with the approaching storm. The first sign of true trouble wasn't a formal letter, but the grocer's boy, who usually delivered their provisions with a cheerful whistle. One blustery morning he appeared at the kitchen door, shuffling his feet and refusing to leave the basket of fresh bread and milk without immediate payment. Cook, a woman of formidable temper, but usually unflappable, was utterly scandalized. "Payment?" she huffed, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "The Fanshawes have always settled their accounts monthly. This is an outrage." But the boy, red-faced and resolute, simply shook his head. "My master's orders, cook. No cash, no crust." That evening, the usual array of delicacies was conspicuously absent from the dinner table. Barnabas barely noticed, too absorbed in his own troubles. He cursed loudly over the post, which now seemed to consist solely of stern letters from various banks and increasingly aggressive notices from suppliers. "Eugenia, what is happening?" he demanded one afternoon, pacing the drawing-room like a caged tiger. "The wine merchant, the tailor, even the blasted stableman, they're all demanding immediate payment, and this is simply absurd." He thrust a final notice for their gas bill into her hand. "They threaten to cut off our service. Do they not know who I am? Barnabas Fanshawe does not have his gas cut off." I merely lowered my embroidery, my face a mask of polite concern. "Perhaps, my dear, it is merely a clerical error?" The words felt like sandpaper in my throat, but I maintained the gentle facade. He needed to believe he was still in control, still capable for a little while longer. Then one chilly evening, it truly happened. Just as the dusk was deepening and the maid was about to light the lamps for dinner, the gas flickered, sputtered, and died. Darkness, thick and sudden, enveloped the manor. A collective gasp rose from the servants' quarters. The maid dropped her tray with a clatter, sending a cascade of porcelain shards across the hall. "What in heaven's name?" Barnabas roared from his study, his voice echoing in the sudden, eerie silence. "Eugenia! Lights!"
At once! The house plunged into a disorienting gloom. Servants scrambled for candles, their faces pale and bewildered in the dancing shadows. The familiar grand halls, usually so warm and inviting, now felt cold and menacing. The next morning, the cook, Mrs. Higgins, approached me, her face a picture of distress. "Mrs. Fanshawe, I must speak with you. Some of the staff, they've received no wages for a fortnight."
And with the gas gone, It's a difficult position, madam. I looked at her. A woman who had served our family for 20 years, her loyalty unwavering. A pang of regret went through me for the collateral damage, but Barnabas had brought this upon them all. "I understand, Mrs. Higgins," I said softly, knowing I could do nothing, yet everything, to alleviate their plight. By noon, 2 of the junior footmen, a scullery maid, and even Barnabas's personal valet, a man who had tolerated his master's moods for a decade, had packed their meagre belongings and departed. Their goodbyes were quiet, respectful, but firm. They simply couldn't afford to stay without pay. Barnabas, oblivious to the deeper truth, descended into a fury. "Insolence! Utter disrespect! These people have no loyalty!" he raged, completely failing to connect their departure with his own financial mismanagement. He genuinely believed it was a lack of character on their part, not a lack of wages. The manor, once bustling with life, began to feel empty, hollowed out. The grand rooms grew dusty, the fires untended in all but the main hearths. The silence was unnerving. Barnabas continued to receive his dire letters, his face growing paler with each one, his bluster increasingly fragile. He was like a man caught in a rising tide, still convinced he could command the waves, while the water crept higher and higher. He couldn't fathom that the beautiful, quiet woman who sat across from him, sipping her tea by candlelight, was the very architect of the deluge. He still thought me a bauble. He would soon learn that baubles, when dropped, could shatter an entire world. The knock on the modest front door of her new home was insistent, jarring the quiet afternoon. Eugenia, now simply living as Mrs. Ashworth, paused, a book of poetry open on her lap. She wasn't expecting anyone. When the maid, a young, cheerful girl named Beatrice, peered around the parlour door, her eyes wide with alarm, Eugenia knew. "Madam," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "There's a gentleman. He insists on seeing you. He says he is your husband." Eugenia felt a slow, cold wave of satisfaction wash over her. She had expected this, of course, but not quite so soon. "Show him in, Beatrice, and then you may attend to your duties." Barnabas Fanshawe strode into her small, but impeccably clean parlour, looking utterly dishevelled. His usually perfectly tailored coat was rumpled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes held a wild, desperate glint she had never seen before. He looked around the room, his lip curling with disdain. "Eugenia! What in heaven's name is this squalor?" he boomed, ignoring Beatrice, who scurried away, clearly intimidated. "This hovel!"
And you sitting here reading poetry, while our entire world crumbles around us. Eugenia rose slowly, gracefully, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. She wore a simple, well-made dress of deep blue, utterly devoid of the elaborate frills she once favored. "Barnabas! To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Her voice was level, calm, betraying nothing of the tremor she felt deep inside. He scoffed, running a hand through his already messy hair. "Unexpected?"
"Our home, Eugenia, our beloved Fanshawe Manor, is being seized. Seized, I tell you, by some obscure bank no less. And that confounded warehouse. It's been taken to. My solicitor is at his wit's end. He says the mortgages were bought up years ago by some anonymous entity, and now they're calling everything in. It's a conspiracy, a vile, unprecedented attack on my good name." He paused, catching his breath, his eyes darting wildly. "And the servants, they've all deserted. The gas is cut, the grocer won't deliver, and the cook is threatening to leave if I don't find some way to pay her wages. It's chaos, Eugenia, utter chaos." He finally looked at her, truly looked at her, but still with that same condescending glare. "You must come back, my dear, at once. The household is in an impossible state. You always managed the staff so well. You always knew how to make ends meet, to smooth things over. This is precisely why a man needs a competent wife, someone to manage the domestic sphere while he attends to grander affairs." Eugenia met his gaze, her heart beating a steady rhythm against her ribs. He still saw her as a domestic manager, a troubleshooter for his self-inflicted disasters. He still, even now, believed himself the victim of some external plot, utterly blind to his own role and to hers. "Barnabas," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority he had never heard from her before. "I am no longer your wife, in the sense you mean, and I certainly won't be returning to Fanshawe Manor." He stared at her, his mouth agape. "Not my wife! What nonsense are you spouting? You are Eugenia Fanshawe. You are obligated. We have a position to maintain. And what do you mean? You won't return? Are you truly so selfish? To abandon your husband, your home, in its hour of greatest need?" He puffed out his chest, attempting to regain some semblance of his former imperiousness. "I forbid it. I demand you pack your bags and return with me immediately. The very fabric of our family depends on it." Eugenia merely smiled, a small, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The fabric of our family, Barnabas, began to fray the moment you called me a pretty bauble, and it has entirely unravelled because of your own grander affairs. I assure you I am quite content here, and I am quite done making ends meet for you." His face contorted, a mixture of outrage and genuine, dawning fear. He still didn't understand, not fully, but a seed of doubt, a sliver of terror, had finally been planted. He looked around her modest parlour again, no longer with disdain, but with a dawning horror that she, his wife, his bauble, was actually quite comfortable without him, and that perhaps she was no longer merely pretty. She was powerful. Barnabas stood in the middle of Eugenia's parlour, sputtering, his face mottled with indignant rage. "Selfish? Eugenia, how dare you? I am your husband. Your duty is to me, to our home. To abandon me now, to leave me to this onslaught of creditors and insolent tradesmen. It's unconscionable." He pointed a shaking finger at her. "And this little charade, this dismal cottage. You expect me to believe you're truly happy here, without the servants, without your balls, your gowns? It's a fit of pique, Eugenia, nothing more, and I simply will not tolerate it." Eugenia watched him, her gaze unwavering. He was a man drowning, still convinced he could command the tide, rather than accept he was the cause of the storm. "It is no charade, Barnabas, and it is certainly no fit of pique. It is simply my life now." Just then a discreet knock sounded at the parlour door. Beatrice, ever watchful, appeared, her eyes darting between the furious Barnabas and the serene Eugenia. "Mr. Ingram, madam, to see you." Barnabas snorted. "Ingram? Who in blazes is Ingram? Tell him to leave. I'm in the middle of a most pressing conversation with my wife." "Show him in, Beatrice," Eugenia instructed, her voice calm. Montgomery Ingram entered, looking as precise and understated as ever, a leather satchel clutched in his hand. He glanced at Barnabas, then nodded respectfully to Eugenia. "Mrs. Ashworth?" Barnabas's head snapped towards Montgomery. "Mrs. Ashworth, what is this absurdity? Eugenia, who is this man, and why does he call you Mrs. Ashworth?" Montgomery, without preamble, opened his satchel and produced a thick stack of documents. "Mr. Fanshawe, I believe these pertain to you." He offered a legal document to Barnabas, who snatched it with a bewildered frown. Barnabas's eyes scanned the paper, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. What is this?"
A notice concerning the mortgage on Fanshawe Manor? But this is from a holding company I've never heard of. And this name here, Ashworth?
What is the meaning of this, Eugenia? He looked at her, his face pale with confusion, then back at the document. And my import-export warehouse. They're calling in that mortgage too. And these anonymous investors in my shipping venture. It mentions the withdrawal of a substantial sum.
£150,000. He stared at Montgomery, then back at Eugenia, a dawning horror slowly spreading across his features. Montgomery stepped forward, his voice clear and professional, yet carrying the weight of finality. Mr. Fanshawe, for the past 5 years, when your own funds proved insufficient, it was my client, acting under the alias of Mrs. Ashworth, who quietly purchased the mortgages on Fanshawe Manor and your import-export warehouse. And it was my client, through a series of discreet shell companies, who funneled that £150,000 into your most recent shipping venture, allowing you to believe it was still viable. Barnabas swayed, gripping the document as if it were a lifeline. His eyes, wide with disbelief, swung from Montgomery to Eugenia. No, that's impossible. This is some trick, some vile fabrication. Eugenia, you couldn't possibly. You have no head for numbers. You're just, a pretty bauble. Eugenia finally spoke, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with a steel that made Barnabas flinch. It wasn't your genius investments, Barnabas. It was my quiet work. That modest inheritance you scoffed at, the one you called pin money. It became the foundation of my own enterprise. While you squandered, I built. While you ridiculed my intelligence, I secured our future, not for us, but for myself. She gestured to Montgomery. Mr.
Ingram here has managed my holdings for 7 years. The tenement buildings, the commercial storefronts, the land parcels, all providing a steady income you never knew existed. And when your own ventures faltered, when the creditors came knocking, it was my funds, Barnabas, that kept you afloat. I kept Fanshawe Manor from ruin. I kept your failing warehouse from collapse.
I gave you that £150,000, letting you believe you were a master of finance, only to pull it back when your condescension became unbearable. Barnabas's jaw hung open, his face ashen. The blood had drained from it completely. The grand Barnabas Fanshawe, the master of commerce, the man who knew everything, was utterly speechless.
His eyes, fixed on Eugenia, slowly filled with a terror that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the complete and utter demolition of his entire perception of reality. He looked not just ruined, but utterly erased. Barnabas stood utterly ruined, the paper with the awful truth clutched in his trembling hand. His face, once so arrogant, was a mask of disbelief. Then slowly, sickeningly, it crumpled. He looked at Eugenia, then at Montgomery Ingram, then back to Eugenia, as if caught in a terrible dream. "No," he whispered, the bluster completely gone from his voice. "No, Eugenia, this cannot be. You cannot do this to me, to us." His eyes, once full of scorn, now pleaded, "This is madness. Your own husband. What will people say?"
Our name, our position, it will be in tatters. Eugenia watched him, a quiet satisfaction blooming in her chest, though she kept her expression perfectly composed. Our name, Barnabas, was in tatters years ago, thanks to your grand ventures. I merely ensured it didn't drag me down with it. But the manor, he choked out, gesturing wildly. Fanshawe Manor, my ancestral home. You would truly let it go?
You would throw away everything for spite? He took a stumbling step towards her, his voice rising, desperation colouring every word. Eugenia, please, you must see reason. This is a misunderstanding, a terrible, terrible mistake. You cannot mean to beggar your own husband. We can fix this. Together. You have the funds, clearly. Just put things right. I'll be more careful, I swear it. I'll listen to your counsel. Anything you say. The words were so pathetic, so utterly unlike the Barnabas she had known, that a flicker of something akin to pity, cold and distant, stirred within her. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his countless slights, his dismissive words, his casual cruelty. "My counsel, Barnabas?" she asked, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "You once told me I had no head for numbers, only society balls. You said I understood nothing beyond which fork to use. You intended to sell my mother's pearl necklace, and you suggested I use my charms to find a wealthy suitor to invest in your failing enterprises. Do you truly believe I would now offer you my wisdom or my money?" He recoiled as if struck, his face reddening. "But that was merely frustration. I didn't mean it, not truly. You know how it is when a man is under pressure. You are my wife, my darling Eugenia."
Please think of our position, our name. How will I ever hold my head up in society if this becomes public? They will mock me. They will laugh. He reached for her hand, his fingers surprisingly cold. Think of us, Eugenia. What kind of future will we have if you do this? Eugenia calmly withdrew her hand, her gaze firm. The kind of future you built, Barnabas. I am merely allowing it to come to fruition.
I have spent years silently propping up your failures, preventing you from facing the consequences of your own actions. No more. Montgomery Ingram, who had stood silently by, cleared his throat. "Mr. Fanshawe, my client, Mrs. Ashworth, has made her position very clear. She will not be providing any further financial assistance." Barnabas ignored him, his gaze fixed on Eugenia, frantic now. "No, Eugenia, please, you must reconsider. I'm begging you, give me some time, just enough to salvage something. I don't know what I'll do. I'll be ruined, utterly, completely ruined. What will become of me?" He was weeping now, thick, ungraceful tears streaming down his face, a truly pathetic sight. The man who had always stood so tall, so proud, was reduced to a snivelling wreck. "What becomes of you, Barnabas?" Eugenia said, her voice soft but unwavering, "is entirely in your own hands, as it always has been. I will not enable your destructive habits any longer. My future, however, is now securely in mine." She turned to Beatrice, who had nervously reappeared at the door. "Beatrice, please show Mr. Fanshawe out." Barnabas looked from Eugenia's resolute face to the young maid, who, though hesitant, nodded, understanding her mistress's command. He knew there was no appeal left. His world, built on arrogance and her hidden strength, was truly gone. He turned and stumbled out of the parlour, leaving Eugenia standing amidst the quiet peace of her own making, finally free. Life in her modest home, freed from the suffocating pretense of Fanshawe Manor, suited Eugenia perfectly. The days passed with a serene rhythm she hadn't known was possible. No longer did she need to feign ignorance or endure Barnabas's endless condescension. Now, as Mrs. Ashworth, she spent her mornings poring over ledgers with Montgomery Ingram, discussing new acquisitions and planning strategic expansions for her thriving real estate empire. The crisp crackle of legal documents, the precise figures of rent rolls, the excited chatter of builders eager to lease her undeveloped land. These were the sounds of her true life. Her small parlour, once a place of quiet defiance, now buzzed with purpose. Montgomery would arrive, usually with fresh flowers from the market for her, and they would settle in to review the week's progress. The tenement buildings continued to generate steady income, their tenants content with the fair rents and consistent upkeep. Her commercial storefronts were fully leased, bustling with the activity of small businesses, a testament to her shrewd investments. She found immense satisfaction in providing well-maintained properties and fair terms, a stark contrast to Barnabas's self-serving ventures. She felt respected, capable, and truly alive for the first time in years. One blustery afternoon, as she and Montgomery were finalizing plans for a new set of townhouses, he cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Ashworth, I believe you would be interested in a development concerning Mr. Fanshawe." Eugenia looked up, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. She hadn't sought news of him, preferring to sever that painful thread entirely, but she couldn't deny a morbid interest. "He has, unfortunately, lost Fanshawe Manor," Montgomery reported, his tone neutral. "The property was officially foreclosed upon and sold at auction, as were the remaining assets of his import-export warehouse. They fetched a surprisingly low price considering the disrepair." "And Barnabas himself?" Eugenia asked, her voice steady. Montgomery hesitated, then continued. "He initially tried to find investors, of course, but his reputation has, shall we say, preceded him. He has taken to employment?" Eugenia raised an eyebrow, a genuine smile finally touching her lips. "Employment? Barnabas?" The idea was almost comical. Barnabas, whose hands had never known honest labor, whose greatest exertion was signing a check or delivering a pompous speech. "Indeed," Montgomery confirmed, a flicker of amusement in his own eyes. "He's currently employed as a clerk for a provisioner's warehouse on the docks. Apparently the owner needed someone who could manage inventory, and Lord Barnabas was quite insistent on his organizational skills." A clerk for a provisioner. The man who had once scoffed at her capacity for numbers was now counting crates and barrels, likely enduring the very same working-class conditions he had so blithely ignored when collecting rents from her tenement buildings. The irony was exquisite. He, who had always viewed work as something for others, was now forced to toil, his pride shattered, his grand pronouncements replaced by the mundane realities of a pay packet. The news settled in Eugenia's heart, not as bitter triumph, but as a deep, quiet justice. He was finally learning the value of a shilling and the dignity of honest labor. History shows us that arrogance precedes the fall. Subscribe if this story moved you.